say the truth is the number one stopper. They say you think, but you never want to speak up. They say you're hot and now you're busy, but what's on your mind, kid? What's on your mind, kid? They say
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for the Board Game Barrage podcast, episode number 3. My name is Mark at boardgamebarrage.com. I can be found under the green tank. Today I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts, Neelan.
Hi, I'm Neelan. I'm the orange tank on the website.
And Kellen.
Heyo, I am the red tank on the website.
Today on the show, we are going to start by going around the table and talking about games we've played this week. We'll follow that up with our feature discussion about the new hot Eric Lang game, Rising Sun, published by CMON. And then we will conclude, as we always do, talking about things we're looking forward to in the gaming world. So let's start off talking about things we've played. Neelan.
I'm going to be talking about Spirit Island. This is a game I picked up towards the end of last year. I hadn't played it for a little bit, but I sort of recently played it in the last week and just sort of reestablished how great this game is. We had it on our collective top 10. I think, Mark, you said you've played it.
I've played
Kellen, you haven't, but...
Well, it's a co-op. So.
Yeah, so you obviously never touched it. But yeah, I think you would really like it. So to talk quickly about what it's all about, the basic gist is, if you can imagine, a island made up of player boards that just grows depending on how many players you have. And every turn, these white plastic figures that represent invaders to the island are being placed. So they start off as explorers, they grow into towns, then they become cities. And as they get sort of more and more developed, they're doing more damage to the land. The idea being that you're spirits of this island. This island is sort of colonized by these locals called the Dahan, and you're sort of rising up and developing in power to sort of protect them, to preserve the island, to fight off the invaders. It's kind of got this really cool sort of anti-colonialism theme, which is really neat. Well, I mean, it's like there are a lot of games that like lean into that kind of problematic thing without actually discussing it.
Pro-colonialism?
Well, I wouldn't say, but I feel like a lot of games like lean on that theme without sort of saying anything significant about it.
Puerto Rico.
Sure, yeah.
Archipelago.
Totally. I think necessarily the intent of the designer for this was specifically encountering that, which I think is neat. It's even if it's sort of not necessarily handled extensively, it's a cool idea.
So, as a co-op, in 2 sentences, explain how it's different than Pandemic.
Okay, that's good. Because I want to start actually by saying that it is very much in the formula of Pandemic, but it does a lot of things that sort of, I think, take it out of that space. For those that aren't familiar with Pandemic, firstly, who are you? Secondly, the gist of Pandemic is that you have a map of the world and cubes are coming out and they're sort of diseasing up the world and you're sort of moving to eradicate them. So the difference between how stuff comes onto the board in Pandemic versus something like Spirit Island is there's sort of a luck component to Pandemic where every turn you're sort of reading cards off the top of this deck and you're like, oh no, India got hit. Oh no, this guy of the country got hit. Where Spirit Island differs in kind of a neat way is that you sort of know what the invaders are going to do a turn in advance.
Right. So
everything you're doing on your turn is sort of like in anticipation of what they're going to do. You're thinking, if I do this now, then that will counter their move next turn. There are like small elements of luck based to some cards, but for the most part, it mitigates a lot of the luck, which I like a lot. It feels more fair for a co-op. And that you might think that would end up being a very procedural deterministic game. And to some extent, it is, but I think there's so much else going on in terms of power and strength and the way that your abilities evolve that it works and it feels really, really, really cool. I would say one of the things I like the most about it is each spirit that you're playing as plays completely differently. They have completely different power sets, different special rules that make them play in interesting ways. So a lot of the joy for me is every time I play that game, I'm thinking, well, I could either play a spirit I'm familiar with and sort of learn how to evolve its play more, or just dive into with something completely different and like have a completely different experience.
Right, the player powers are quite varied.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're quite distinct. Well, my issue sometimes with co-op games is the quarterbacking issue, which for those who don't know is the idea that in a game where you're all sharing the responsibility for what happens on the board, one alpha sort of player leads the...
That's Mark, by the way. Screaming at everyone from the sidelines.
leads the movements and the choices you make on the board. So it becomes often...
Yeah, consensus pick.
Right.
Led by one person who's domineering.
Right, which can make it sometimes less fun for other players. What do you think Spirit Island does to counteract that?
I'm glad you asked, because actually because genuinely this is actually one of my favorite things about it. This is a problem that plagues the genre, which it's not a lot of games make any effort to fix it, and I don't know. I want to say this is deliberate because I want to put my faith in the designers, but there is a lot that makes quarterbacking very hard in Spirit Island, specifically because the game is complex enough, and your spirit, the strategy that will make your spirit works on any given turn, is hard enough that you're spending all your time poring over your cards in your hand,
right,
and thinking, well, if I play this power here on this section of the map, then I can do that, and that'll push these guys away, and there is so much going on just on your side of the board that the idea of even taking a few seconds to consider what another player who has a completely different player power, a completely different set of cards in their hand, not knowing exactly which cards they played, what they're capable of, I don't even know how you would begin to start solving someone else's side of the board.
Right, and there's the idea that cards behave in two ways: the fast acting and
the
slow acting. And,
So because the game, the action phase is divided into these two steps: one which sort of happens before the invaders move, and one that happens after. So there are almost two phases you'd have to be thinking about in conjunction for every player. So the best you can do is, oh, hey, I need a little bit of help with this town over here. Can you help me out with that?
Can you get this quick?
Exactly. Can you get this quickly in the fast phase? Or maybe should we set up something? Can you do something to help me out in the slow phase over here? So it's all in vague terms, which, I don't know, I feel like that really works well to counter that problem.
So I think the reason that I'm so excited to try Spirit Island is because Neelan is known to be a little bit of a robot within our group, sort of emotionless, without feeling. And the other night, I was up really late, and I just checked our Twitter account, and I saw this tweet from Neelan that said, "Reaffirmed my love for Spirit Island last night." I was a little uncomfortable with that. I wasn't sure how that love was reaffirmed. But this tweet was at 2 a.m, I think. Anyway, regardless,
that's actually really funny because I think that night we played a game of Spirit Island and we were like, let's run this back until 2 a.m. type thing. We were that high on the idea of Spirit Island that night. So.
You would have run it back until 2 a.m. except your batteries were running low.
Yeah, exactly.
Plug yourself back. Yeah, exactly.
He's very excited, so I'm excited.
Yeah, that's about all I have to say about it. I think the other stuff that's quite cool, which I haven't even dug into yet, is that there is an expansion for it. There's a lot of content in the base box.
Already an expansion?
Yeah, it was a Kickstarter game, so I think that stuff was just rolled into it. I believe it's hitting retail release around about this time, on a more widespread scale. So if that sounds like your jam, go ahead and pick it up. It's real good.
Just go ahead and invite me to your Wednesday game night, and I will play Spirit Island with you.
Yes.
So I played the new Tim Fowers game, Hardback, which is a word game / deck builder. So deck builder is a game where you've got a deck of cards and you draw 5 off the top and you use those cards to often buy new cards, adding cards to your deck. And as you go through them, your deck is increasing in size. And in this case, because it's a word game, all the cards represent letters of the alphabet. And what you're doing is with the cards that you purchase, you are creating words, and the size of the words and the rarity of the letters give you purchasing power to buy more letters. So I might make, if I make a small word like cat, that might only be worth, the currency is cents. So the C may be worth 1 cent, and A would be maybe worth 1 cent, and T may be worth 1 cent. So if I make cat, it's only worth 3 cents of buying more letters for my deck. Whereas if I made a longer word like deoxyribonucleic acid, which is impossible, but it's a long word that popped into mind, I would have a lot more purchasing power to buy more cards into my hand. I really enjoyed it. I like word games. I'm not so much into deck builders in general, but I do like word games, and this was a really well done word game.
So what does it lean into? So as a word game / deck builder, right? Deck builder a la Dominion.
Right.
Is it more of a word game or is it more of a deck builder?
So it's funny you mention that because Fowers, this is sort of his follow-up to another deck building word game that he made called Paperback.
Okay.
Which was released a couple years ago.
That's in reverse order, right?
Yeah, right. The hardback comes first, right. In this case, Paperback. So with Paperback, which is also a deck building word game, that was much more in the style of Dominion, where you were using your purchasing power, your points, or your currency, to buy both extra letters to add to your deck, but you were also buying victory point cards. Hardback doesn't have that. Hardback has 2 sort of currencies in the game. There's a currency that you have to buy other cards, and then there's victory points. So cards can also be worth victory points. And whenever you play cards that are worth victory points, you move up this victory point track. And it's the first to 60 points that wins.
So I'm having a hard time visualizing what a turn is like on Hardback. Like, am I drawing 5 cards and trying to spell California?
Sure. So this also speaks to the difference between paperback and hardback. In both games, you're drawing 5 cards off of the top of your deck, and sometimes you can draw more cards if you have powers or if you have cards that allow you to draw more cards. But generally, you're drawing cards off of your deck, and then you are making words with them to either get, in hardback, you're either getting victory points or currency to buy more cards. The difference between the two games, and the reason I feel like I like hardback more, is in paperback, in both games there are wild letters. So there's cards that represent wild letters in case you have, a handful of consonants and you couldn't make a card with a vowel. Paperback, you rely on drawing either those vowels or those letters you need, or drawing a wild card. Hardback, the big difference with that is any card that you use can be used as a wild card. You just flip it face down. So you don't get the benefits of that card because you're flipping it face down, but it's considered a wild card. So that, I think, lends itself to a more creative experience, because paperback, you were very tied into the letters you drew.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it sounds like the way you were describing it initially, like, I guess I don't know how big these decks are, but like they end up just cycling through the same letters otherwise?
Right. So you're cycling, but you're also buying letters. So when you buy letters, you buy them, as with most deck builders, you're buying cards, which in this case are letters, and you're putting them into your discard pile. Once you go through your deck and you have just a discard pile left, you're shuffling up the discard pile and you're drawing back up. So that your deck increases because you've bought cards using it throughout the game.
Sure. It sounds like hardback fixes that a lot with the wild.
Right. I think with word games, it's very fun to be like clever. In Scrabble or something, you want to like throw out those really interesting big words, these long words. And paperback, you're really restricted again because there's so few wilds that you had to really draw a really big word. It just had to be off the deck draw. There's some things to mitigate it, but they're limited in paperback. And just the fact that you can use wilds, any card as a wild in hardback, just makes it a lot more open to, you see a couple letters in your deck, in your hand, and things strike you. You get that, oh, I can make this word if I just had a couple wilds, and sure enough you do, because every card is a wild.
So in your mind, is hardback a strictly better evolution of paperback?
I think so. For me, it would be hard for me to recommend, and I know paperback has a lot of fans, and I get it because the combination of deck builder plus word game is really cool. It's a very interesting combination of mechanics and types of games. But it would be hard for me to recommend paperback over hardback. I think the only exception to that is maybe people who are really into a Dominion style of game, because with paperback there's that push and pull of, do I start buying victory cards now or do I keep building my engine? Like with those kind of games, you have to work out that transition of, am I going to sacrifice flexibility in my cards because I want to start buying victory points, or do I continue building my engine? There is that in paperback that is taken out of hardback, but in my opinion, that's for the better. So I'd recommend hardback in general, and I would recommend it over paperback.
It's hard to go back.
Great. Yeah.
My last question on this.
Yeah.
I hear word games, I think of my mom, right? I think of playing Scrabble with her constantly. We do it fairly frequently. Can I bust this out with my mom and play hardback and or paperback?
I think so. It's hard for me to tell, because being so steeped in the gaming world, sometimes I feel like realizing where that line is for a gateway game exactly is. But I feel like this game is pretty straightforward. Really, all you'd have to introduce is the general deck building idea, where you're buying cards, putting them into your discard pile, and recycling them. And then you'd have to explain the whole buying cards thing. And then also the fact that cards can be used as victory points. I think that's not too much. I think it may be too much for some and maybe for most, and I'm just sort of calibrating it. But it's really just 3 ideas that you need to introduce. And I think that, I think people, once they see that a game maybe is for them or scratches an itch they like word games for a lot of casual gamers, once they sort of get that, hey, this is a game where I can make words and it's like, It taps into my just enjoyment of word games. That sort of encourages them to get more into it and maybe learn a little bit more, or maybe like have a little more, patience in so far as getting the rules. If they feel like they're invested in it because it speaks to them, I think that encourages them to get into it. So, actually the more I talk about it, the more it does sort of strike me as a good gateway game to a lot of casual players.
Yeah, my experience with deck builders and non-gamers in general is that once you get over that very initial hurdle of like, wait, what are we doing? We're putting cards here. And like after a couple of rounds, it's so completely second nature that it's almost irrelevant.
It's sort of a mechanism that's built to be done fairly quickly. Yeah. So it's pretty simple once you have done it a couple of times. You get the hang of it. Cool. So yeah, hardback, 10 hours. I would definitely recommend it.
All right, guys. The game that I want to talk about this week is called Decrypto. Decrypto is a new word game that I believe is out now or just about coming out. And it's very difficult to explain, so I will do my best. I've taught it to a few different groups, and even teaching the game is challenging. What makes this game unique is that each team has a set of 4 secret words that everyone on the team already knows. So you have this little setup that has all 4 of your words, and both teams are facing each other. So everyone on black team can see the black words. Everyone on white team can see the white words. Each round, you will alternate who is giving clues to their team. So I'm on the white team. I'll get a card that has a series of 3 numbers on it. So it'll say 3, 4, 2. And that's actually referring to the order in which I'm trying to get my team to guess the words that they see in front of them. So in this example, we'll say that word 1 is black, word 2 is dragonfly, word 3 is cocktail, and word 4 is sombrero. And so I draw this card that says 3, 4, 2. So what that means is that I need my team to guess in order cocktail, sombrero, dragonfly. But the other team won't know the words that my team is guessing. My team will actually be guessing in numerical format. So I will give a clue to my team for each one of these numbers in order. A clue for 3, a clue for 4, and a clue for 2. That sounds really simple, right? Because they know what the words are. The reason that it's so complicated is that the other team gets to guess beforehand the numerical code, and if they get it right, they steal that point. So in the first round, the other team will have nothing to go on, but every subsequent round, they're going to be building a profile of clues that you've given towards a word like sombrero. The first clue in round 1 might be hat, and then the next clue might be, Mexico. And then the other team, from that point on, anytime you give a further clue about a sombrero, they're going to pretty much know which number that is. And if the other team steals 2 rounds, they actually win the game. That isn't doing it justice. Decrypto is an amazing new word game that we've had a tremendous amount of time playing. It is a little confusing in the back and forth rounds. It's sort of similar to another game we've talked about, Crosstalk. But honestly, I haven't had this much fun with a word game in quite a while. What do you guys think about it?
I loved it. I think it was really good. Like I think that push and pull that you're describing of giving clues that almost you're hoping that your team is smart enough to sort of figure out what you're doing, but slightly smarter than the other team who might have just as much information. It's really cool.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it as well. I agree that the explanation curve can be a little bit of a steep one to start with, sort of like Crosstalk, where explaining it, people don't really get it right off the bat, but you play like a round or 2 of it and it all sort of clicks in, and like the genius of it clicks in, and then it's just phenomenal. I've loved every play of it that we've done.
Yeah, so if you think about a word like dragonfly, a lot of times your clues can be in the context of the other 3 words that you have there. Because your clue could be fire breathing. And that isn't really what a dragonfly does, but for 1 round, their choices are black, dragonfly, cocktail, or sombrero. They're going to get that it's dragonfly.
Right.
And so then the next time you give a clue for dragonfly, you could say bug. And once again, your team would easily get that it's dragonfly.
But the other team is, the other team's confused.
Looking at fire breathing and bug, and they're like, those 2 can't be connected.
Right.
But then the next time you add the word wings, and suddenly wings, bug, fire breathing, like maybe those are connected.
Right.
And so at some point, you've just given the other team too much information. And it's all about like taking those calculated risks and figuring out how to get your team to just get to your code, as it were. The components in this are also adorable. I love the box. It's like $20 game. We could go on about this game, but I think it's one we'll do more of a written review on the site for because I absolutely love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is Decrypto. This is Decrypto. I'm holding the box because
shaking it about.
Because I actually was so worried I couldn't even describe the game. So,
all right. So now let's go into our feature discussion, which is about the new hot game from Eric Lang and CMON, Rising Sun. It's the top story on a lot of game sites. It's the game that everybody's sort of clamoring to get and to play. It seems like it's everywhere. A little background on Rising Sun. It's by, again, Eric Lang, who is one of the hottest designers in board gaming right now. It is sort of the successor to his other very popular game, Blood Rage, which was also a CMON published game. Also a very successful Kickstarter a couple years back. Rising Sun is sort of in the same vein. It was the biggest Kickstarter, I believe, in board gaming last year, raising about $4 million, a little over $4 million.
It was close. There may have been
I think
Haven or Seventh Continent.
Yeah,
right there. But certainly
up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the day it launched. Any board game site that I went to, the only story was people ordering, like waiting for it to be announced or to actually be live. It was a huge story. So now people are starting to receive it. We've, two of us actually have received our copies. Mine is still in transit for some reason.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But we've all played it at least once. And so it seems fitting to talk about the hottest game right now. So I guess let's start with talking about what the sort of mechanics of the game are and how it's played.
Great. I'll jump right in. Rising Sun is a dudes on a map game using action selection, diplomacy, and a pretty cool combat system. So essentially the game is broken out into seasons, and Neelan, correct me if I'm doing any of this wrong. It's broken out into seasons. You've got a map of Japan, and every turn you'll be handed 4 mandates, and you'll have to choose which mandate you want to do. And this will give you an action on the board. Things like moving troops around, things like harvesting, which allows you to collect resources. But what's cool about this game is that when you choose an action, if you have an alliance with another player, they get the full action with you.
Yeah.
So the game is broken up into alliance phases, which happen at the beginning. I think that's called the tea ceremony. And then you get to choose your action. And after a series of these actions or mandates, combat will happen in any area where there's a combat marker?
Yeah, I think so. A portion of the provinces will have combats in each season, and they're randomized each season.
And the combat system is a little a la Cry Havoc, if you've played that, where you have behind your screen sort of a list of actions that could happen with your troops in that area, and you'll commit coins to those actions, and whoever has bid the most for that action will get to carry that out. There's actions like Seppuku, which gets you victory points in exchange for killing your own troops. There is... What else is there?
Take hostages?
Take hostages, which allows you to take some of their guys out of the map for a turn. And then there is the victory points for how many people have died space. So if you want to bid 5 coins and no one else has bid coins, then you're going to get victory points for everyone who's died in that battle. And they all sort of resolve in this order. So it's a kind of a thinky part of the game where you have to decide how you want to allocate your money, because you will need that money for future fights. So everyone knows how much money everyone has, and everyone knows the order in which the battles will resolve. So I think a lot of the thinking in the game comes down to this section. This is where the game sort of slows down as everyone is trying to calculate out from 1 to whatever, which province. And then all the money that is actually flows into the combat is divided among the losers of that combat. So you might actually purposefully lose earlier on and hope that an opponent has actually spent too much money bidding on these actions behind the screen, so that you can win a future fight. So that's sort of the gist of it. You also are collecting sort of upgrade cards that give you monsters. So if this sounds like a lot going on, it's more simple than I'm describing it now. It's a really cool game. I have not played it as much as these guys have yet, but I'm super excited to play more of it. I think it feels quick. It's quicker than you might expect, and I like it better than Blood Rage. Let's just say that, which should anger someone.
I agree with you. I don't like Blood Rage a whole lot. I think it's fine. I think it's a fine game. I don't think it's great. I liked Rising Sun a lot more on both times I played it.
I like Blood Rage probably more than you, Neelan, but I also think that Rising Sun is a better game. And I was sort of skeptical because there was so much hype for Rising Sun, and I felt like there was so much pressure on Eric Lang and CMON to come through on this because so many people were behind it that I couldn't
possibly
to come through. Yeah. And I don't think it's the greatest game of all time, but I think it's a really solid, fun game for sure.
There were so many parts in like both of the games I played of it where you were just thinking like, okay, well, you're seeing like how few actions you have and how tight every decision you have to make is, because you have 4 dudes on the map game, like a relatively small number of figures on the board. Like every sort of allocation of a figure to a province is sort of a big deal. And you're thinking, well, if I move this one guy here, then I won't be able to fight in this province. If I do that, I won't have enough force to even muster up enough strength to like take that province. It's really, really tight, which surprised me. People have asked me what the difference is between, or what the similarities are, what the relationship between Blood Rage and Rising Sun is. And it's been hard for me to enunciate that because the games feel so different, but also similar in a way. And I think the similarity comes from the fact that both games, I feel, are very tight and lean on the number of actions you have, but every action you do have sort of feels big. Mm-hmm. So to make up for the lack of number of actions you have, they feel sort of cool and fun and powerful. So when you do make an action, you feel like, wow, okay, I've committed this monster here. It feels like a big deal. Right.
And I think that's the common link between the two games. Otherwise, they're quite, well, they're both dudes on the map and they're both area control, but the way you get there feels quite different.
One thing that I think that's interesting with Rising Sun is that you don't even know that in a given season if you'll have the chance to perform an action that you might feel is crucial before the round ends, because that's dictated by other players that might be coming after you, right? So I think that starts to lean into like a little bit of the negotiation side of this game, which is saying like, oh, hey, if you guarantee that we will do this in a subsequent action, that's going to be really strong for me, but there's no guarantee it's going to happen. So like you said, you might set up your monster in this province hoping to move it somewhere else, but you just don't know for sure you're even going to get the chance to do that.
Right, because there are 5 types of actions that you can choose from. This mandate phase is when the player in turn order, when they're actually selecting what everybody at the table is doing, and they can select one of 5 different types of actions. Like one of them is spawning more pieces on the board, more characters. There's another one that is the one that allows for movement. And each of these mandates can only happen a maximum of 2 times per round, and there are only 3 rounds in the game. So, I mean, you could move as many as 6 times. I mean, there are ways to move that you can acquire from buying cards, which is a different part of the game. But in a lot of situations, you'll only be able to move a maximum of 6 times, and that's, again, a maximum. Because people are going around the table selecting what everybody's going to do, if it's not in somebody's interest to move pieces around the board, like if somebody feels good about their situation in terms of the location of their pieces, they can just do their best to make sure that the movement tile doesn't come up.
Right.
You could move as few as maybe, say, 3 or 4 times per game. And so we're talking about moving a total of 3 or 4 times in a full game your pieces around the board. So every action is just so crucial. There's so few actions, and like the fact that movement is so possibly rare, it's just a big thing.
Yeah, and I think the timing of that is also the most interesting challenge, which is like if you're the 4th player, it might be in your best interest to harvest the land, so to speak, and then move troops to prepare for combat.
Right.
But someone else will want to harvest right now, and then so you have to think about what does Mark want to do at the beginning of the turn order, and how can I use that to my advantage later on. And so all of these actions are coming out. Like you said, there's only 5 of them, but sometimes the strict order of how they happen will favor one player heavily over another player.
There's one thing, I forget if you alluded this to when you were explaining it, but the way that the action system works is you're going to know 3 of the possible actions of the next player. So there's also this element of like, okay, well, if I do this, I know I'm giving this player the chance to do this. I might want to do that to bury that before they get the chance to do it. So that's also an interesting side of it. It's like sort of you're planning based on what you know is coming up.
Right.
Yeah, and so there are 5 mandates. 4 of them. There's one that's a unique one called the Betrayal Mandate. But the other 4 have 2 versions. So the person who is selecting the mandate, and if they have an ally, they will both get a much more, in most cases, a much more powerful version of the action. So that's to sort of piggyback on Neelan's thought. You're drawing 4 of these mandates from the top of the stack, and you're selecting one, and you know you're going to give 3 to the person who's coming up next. So if that's an ally, you're fine, because you can even converse about, hey, I'm going to do this real powerful action and we're both going to benefit. And then when it's your turn coming up next, you can do it too. But if it's not an ally, the idea that you're going to be giving the next person who's probably an adversary a powerful action, you're even more inclined to figure out what you want to play now. The timing becomes that much more important because you're giving the next player the ability to do a much greater version of an action. So when it comes to the actions you're giving up, the choice becomes even more important for that reason.
One thing that we have not mentioned yet is actually each faction also has an asymmetrical power that is unique to their faction. And I was just remembering our game, my faction, which was the flower faction? Lotus?
Lotus or
is
something,
that a powerful flower faction?
I love that you only realized it was a flower halfway through the game as well.
Yeah, it took me a while to understand what a lotus was, but they actually have the ability to play any mandate they want, so they can just discard one of the mandate tokens and say, this is a harvest action, or this is a move action. And what that allows you to do is bury other mandates that other players may want to use, which is like the coolest. I was having a ton of fun with that because I was seeing, what do my non-allies, what do my enemies want to do, and I'm going to bury that action and then tell them that I buried something else, so that they're planning for things that they're not going to be able to do. And that was hilarious to listen to and watch, as they got to the end of the round and realized that I had lied to them. I just don't know what you were expecting.
Right. And something I think that's also, we should point out at this point, so we've spoken about allies, but all of that is super tenuous at best, because throughout even a given season, like say I decide at the beginning of the season that Mark is my ally for the season, I'm having other discussions with other people around the table, because maybe the Mark Neelan alliance sort of starts to break down halfway through the season. Right. Because Mark's marched these people into my territory, which
we're just visiting.
But yeah, so then it suddenly becomes a question of like, well, I said I would move my troops, Mark, but I'm actually in a better position right now, and I'm scared of what you might do if I allow you to move this, so I'm sort of going to unofficially break this alliance and do something else instead, and that's a big part of it.
I mean, you say unofficially break the alliance, but one of the mandates, one that we haven't really spoken about is the Betrayal Mandate, which doesn't unofficially break the alliance, it actually officially breaks the alliance. And whenever a person plays the Betrayal Mandate, any alliances they have are immediately broken, and it allows you to swap one character from 2 different players with one of your own.
Which is crazy powerful.
Yeah, which is very powerful. And in odd number games, when obviously one person is left out, then for them, in an even number game, people are always sort of hesitant to use the betrayal action because they don't want to generally, if Callan's not playing especially, break the alliance. But in an odd number game where you have a person that's by themselves, the betrayal action doesn't carry the same weight because you're not breaking an alliance, and because it's such a powerful action, it sort of balances the fact that you're on your own. You get to do this powerful action without worrying about betrayal and breaking your alliance and all the negative things that happen because of that. So it's a good way to give the odd man out, the lone wolf, I think it's referred to, a little bit of advantage.
I think what's interesting, and what you guys are both kind of hinting at, is that an alliance born out of just, we're playing a game of Cosmic Encounter, and an alliance born out of everyone else being horrible, and, Mark and Kellen are on a quest to win together. Like, that's a stronger tie than the alliance phase is in Rising Sun. In Rising Sun, you are officially in an alliance together just by virtue of being, you're going to be wanting to do the same type of actions. So if you notice in the tea ceremony that both players, you and another player, both need to get more troops onto the board and both want to move those troops around, then that makes you a strong candidate for a quote-unquote alliance.
Right.
But in reality, all you're doing is like skimming actions off of each other.
Right.
You're not, there's no social trust that is built out of that alliance. So it's kind of easier in my mind to betray that alliance,
Sure.
But you start, you like Neelan mentioned, you start talking to other players, you start moving around, and you think, wait a minute, I'm in an alliance with Neelan, and then you're kind of like, well, that doesn't mean anything, and then the tea ceremony's about to happen again, and then who cares about Neelan?
Right.
So for some reason, you are in this structured alliance, but I feel like those ties don't feel as strong as some of the alliances born in other games, more organically, not set by the game itself.
Do you think that's better, or do you think it's better or worse for it? I feel like you lean towards more the cosmic, informal, but alliance of friendship.
Well, and cosmic is a bit of an unfair comparison because you can also win together.
Sure.
And actually, you technically can in Rising Sun.
rare.
But it's super rare.
If points align, if, we were talking about shooting the moon and trying to do that. I like both. I think that the negotiation, the alliances, that'll evolve as you play the game more.
Right.
And so it does feel a little bit arbitrary in sort of just the first couple games because you sort of don't understand why you're doing a thing, and it seems like being an alliance is just better than not being an alliance, almost completely. Right. And there's a lot of talk online, like, well, in these odd player games, if you're the odd man out, can you even win? And there's a lot of people who are already upset about this. I think you add negotiation to any game, and I think it's a hot button for gamers. Some love it, a minority love it, I think, and then the majority is a little more concerned that their Euro dudes on a map game is about to be unpure.
Some people worry that it becomes like more of a test of personality in those situations rather than a test of like skill at the game.
Right, or even just like a cover for mechanics and balance. So it's like, oh hey, we didn't really quite think these mechanics through, but negotiation, guys.
Right, fills in the gaps. Right, yeah.
I don't think that's strictly fair in the case of Rising. In my limited experience, having played it, but yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder how many games would bear that out.
Yeah, and balance is also, speaking of balance, is an interesting topic because as we, I think Kellen mentioned, all the different clans have very asymmetric powers that vary greatly, and there's been talk about whether one clan is much more powerful than the other and how truly balanced the clans are, the 5 different clans are. It's hard for me, I've only played it twice, so it's hard for me to tell whether I believe they're balanced. But it seems to me that the negotiation, I don't think the negotiation is sort of a salve for balance issues, but I think that like the hint of negotiation and the fact that all the powers, it sort of strikes me, this is a sort of a strange comparison, but it sort of strikes me as a little bit like Marco Polo, the Euro game, which is a much more standard Euro game. But in Marco Polo, you get assigned a player at the beginning of the game where you can choose a player, and their player powers are notorious for being wildly game-breaking. And that game still works. It still is, I feel, quite balanced. I get the same sense in Rising Sun that the player powers are pretty varied and quite strong, but I think they all sort of work out, and with a little bit of negotiation, everything does seem balanced to me.
I think one of these unique things that I'm sort of developing my commentary on the fly here, but in a game like Scythe and in Rising Sun, I almost don't like that the asymmetric powers sort of say, like, this is how you will play the game, and this is what will lead you to success. Because both games feel a bit more open-ended than that, but I think, like, Mark, you played the Koi faction, which was very combat heavy, and in Scythe, that's the black player who can win
multiple combats,
win multiple achievements, and in some ways, that is not very flexible. Which is to say, in a tighter, more Euro-like game, if you're not exploiting your advantage in your asymmetrical power, then you won't win.
Right.
And I think that limits your options rather than expands them. It does make you feel different at the table, which is cool. Versus like a cosmic encounter, like we've talked about, where that game is just your power is completely different. You are it's insane, and that's your whole game. Mm-hmm. In like these more Euro-y-ish games where you're just given a power, if you don't do it, you feel at a disadvantage. And I think that kind of bothers me a little bit. Like it restricts you rather than frees you to be unique.
Okay, I'm curious. I get what you're saying, and I feel like part of me agrees with it. But Cthulhu Wars, which is your baby or one of your babies, it's sort of
many.
Yes, also sort of has the same feeling to it, where the different factions have an aspect. And
yeah. And I'm developing in real time, so I can be made wrong.
Sure.
But I think Cthulhu Wars is once again an example where every faction is literally entirely different. Like what you're doing is you have 7 different powers. They're completely different. Right. All your units are different. And that becomes like you're playing a different game. Like playing the yellow sign in Cthulhu Wars, you're playing a different game than everyone else is playing. So I'm saying like in the structure of this more rigid...
I see what you're saying. You're saying it's more about like with Cthulhu Wars and Cosmic Counters, as you said, you're playing a different game almost. Whereas with Marco Polo and with Rising Sun, you're getting basically an advantage.
You have a combat advantage.
You have like an efficiency advantage.
Don't do that correct. An efficiency advantage. Sure.
I also I don't think I played Cthulhu Wars as much as you, but I feel like even within any given faction, there are kind of multiple paths you can pursue within that faction. Whereas I think which is exactly what you're saying is like each faction is its own game with like multiple strategies to pursue. Whereas in something like Rising Sun, you're playing the same game, but you're being told this is the ability to exploit.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Leaders expansion for Seven Wonders, which gets this criticism a lot as well, which is like you do a draft before the draft, and that draft tells you what you'll be good at, or what and then suddenly instead of reacting in real time, you're always trying to balance that against what is your
path,
your specialty, or your path.
Right.
But the funny thing is on the surface, if you say asymmetrical player powers, I'm the first one to say, yes, I want that. That's exciting. That's cool. And I think, does Blood Rage? Blood Rage doesn't.
No, it does
doesn't.
not.
And so this was one of the things that I was excited about. And I don't know. And I think especially like the combat heavy ones, I don't think I would have been as happy getting the combat focus faction in Rising Sun. I wouldn't have wanted... I like combat. I like fighting. But I don't like something telling me that's what you have to do.
Right. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Do you think there are non-combat factions in Rising Sun?
I mean, I haven't seen them all, so that's a bit... I think my faction is actually that I played, the Lotus faction, is a good example of disagreeing with myself here, which is it just increased your flexibility during the mandate phase. Like Christina's faction, she played the Dragonfly, which is the second time we've said Dragonfly in this episode, so that's odd. Allowed her to move around the board, much more efficiently. Mm-hmm. So she should be exploiting, trying to get harvests, and if she's not doing that, then she's, I think you were kind of holed up in one area.
Actually, now that you mentioned it, I think like actually my faction so I was playing I forget their name, but they're a faction that allows you to buy cards for extremely cheap.
The tech tree upgrade system.
So it almost behooved me to like sort of not necessarily stay. I don't think you can win that game by staying at the fights, but I was buying a lot of cards and exploiting the victory points of the cards more than anything else. Yeah.
Until I formed everyone.
Yes, exactly.
To not allow you to do that anymore. Because Neelan is always winning anytime we play.
Totally, and then lost to Mark, who was actually winning.
I was 1 point away. I will accept a 1 point defeat. It's just a thought.
It seems like the different powers though. Also, because there's a bluffing aspect to the game in general, you can sort of make people think that you're using your power for the way that it's maybe optimally created for, but then you can use assuming you're going to do it that way to take advantages in other aspects of the game. Like, for example, I was playing with the Koi clan, which is a very combat heavy, as you said, but I found that, and so for the Koi clan, you can use coins as what are called Ronin, which boost your attacking strength. But it's sort of key if you're going to play that clan straight to always win the Ronin aspect of battle, the higher Ronin. So people expect you to bid enough coins to win this part of battle called higher Ronin, and then it sort of piggyback on each other, and you just get these enormous armies. But because everybody sort of thinks that you're going to do that, obviously, they sometimes won't bid on hiring Ronin at all. So then a Koi player can just bid like a single coin. So basically, whereas people are thinking you're going to use all these resources on something that is sort of built for your faction, you can zag when they're thinking you're going to zig and use your resources elsewhere. So it allows you to, play with other sort of strategies. I feel like the bluffing, there's enough bluffing there that you don't have to play it quite so down the like efficiency track.
I think in the concisest way possible. You have a game like Gaia Project where we've talked about how the fun of the game is a completely asymmetric faction, and you are solving the puzzle of that faction as it relates to the board.
Right.
And in a game like Rising Sun, where the game is supposed to be between you and your friends and not necessarily the game system, that there's that nagging thought in the back of my mind, which is, am I playing the way that this faction is supposed to be from an efficiency perspective?
Right.
And that's what you get with these sort of hybrids. I feel much freer in a game like Cosmic Encounter and in a game like Cthulhu Wars, just where you know who you are.
I get
a weird... that was my efficient explanation.
Right.
So it was still pretty long.
So what does a game of Rising Sun look like if we just play without player powers? Do you think that works?
I do think it works. I think, the balance of the
map
upgrade
positioning and exactly
and stuff.
That's where it gets weird.
But I think it could work. I think it would be much straighter and much more focused on diplomacy and negotiation.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's that game strikes me as a much lesser game, a much more standard Euro. I
think so too. I do think like the little bit of like faction asymmetry gives you enough flavor to be like, oh, I'm enjoying.
If you're the Dragonfly player, like, hey, I'm the person who can go anywhere.
Right, exactly.
And if like when I was the Koi player, I'm like, okay, I'm the army guy. Like I'm the guy who can come in with these big armies. Yeah. So I feel like without that, it would just be too straight of a game in general.
Yeah, it's a game that gets by on that. Not gets by, but it's a game that especially thrives on that flavor.
Right.
Like, and that comes through in like the monster figurines and just the look of the board. I do think I like Mark says, I think it's a much lesser game without that.
And speaking of the looks of the board, I mean,
oh man,
well, yeah, with CMON games and with Eric Lang, it seems like Eric Lang games, you've got these really great miniature sculpts, and the board looks the colors. Personally, I love the colors. They're bright and vibrant and just
but not gaudy, just like this very soft.
Yeah,
it's great. If you haven't seen pictures of Rising Sun, like just do yourself a favor and look at the board, look at the minis. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and I'd say if you're a fan of Blood Rage on an aesthetic level when it comes to the minis, you'll be a fan of Rising Sun along those same lines. All right, guys. So, what do you think is the verdict on Rising Sun? What do you guys think of it in general?
I think Rising Sun is super great. I'm super excited to play more. Glad to have it on the shelf. It does take up a lot of shelf space. It is in a crowded field in my house with Inish and Cthulhu Wars and Blood Rage. So there's some strong competition. So I think we'll see where it nets out after 5 more plays. But super excited to have it.
Yeah, I wish I had it on my shelf. CMON, please get on that. I'm still waiting. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I'm excited to play it again for sure. I'm excited to try other factions. So far, I've played the Koi faction twice because I want to play other factions, but I'm also interested in really getting into factions as well, playing both for the breadth and the depth. So I think it's a great game, and very excited to play it again.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. It's interesting when you bring up other dudes in the map games, like where it fits in that space, because this is kind of a problem of figuring out how many of these you need. I don't think it's as strong as the things as my favorites in that genre, like Inish and Cthulhu Wars, but it's right up there. Like, it's definitely like a top 5 area control dudes in the map game for me.
It beats Cry Havoc.
Yeah, totally. But I don't. There are a handful of games that I just don't think I would want to play over Rising Sun anymore.
Right.
Chaos in the Old World.
I still haven't played that. I really want to.
Don't admit that out loud.
But yeah, I guess if any of this sounds interesting and you missed out on the Kickstarter, then it's going to be available at retail in March, I think. Pick it up. It's pretty good.
All right, let's wrap up the show talking about things we're looking forward to in gaming. I'll start. I'm looking forward to the new game by Sierra Madre and Cole Worley, I believe is the designer. John Company, about the East Indian trading company. It's in the whole... Sierra Madre is known for doing these historical simulations where they're more focused on simulating an aspect of history than actually like being very concerned necessarily with gameplay, which is sort of an odd way to approach game design. But it's interesting. Their games are always very historically rich and very unique when it comes to mechanisms and the way that history is presented. So yeah, I'm very interested and excited to finally get a crack at John Company by Sierra Madre Games.
I somehow managed to pick up, just coincidentally, 3 new CGE games I'm excited to try. So Alchemist is one I hadn't tried yet. Read the rules for that, and that seems cool. Seems way up my alley. Tash Kalar is a Vlaada Fatal game I've heard so much about and never played. So I'm excited to play that because I love his stuff. And Adrenaline, I might try playing the next week as well.
I'm just super excited to play some games. I've been out of the country for work, picked up some Oink games in Japan, a couple ones that I haven't seen much buzz about, so I'm excited to try those. But I think my shelf of shame has never been bigger, just with a ton of stuff. So I need to stop recording this podcast. Just get through the backlog. You know, it's challenging when these guys won't invite me to their game nights.
We're warming up to you.
Yeah,
you're on the short list.
It's tough, you know. So that's what I'm excited for.
All right, that's going to do it for the show today. Thank you all for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, and we would love to hear from you, you can find us in any number of ways. Primarily, our website is boardgamebarrage.com, but we can be found on all types of social media, Facebook, Instagram. On Twitter, we are
BRD Game Barrage.
BRD Game Barrage. Also, we want to thank Heart Society for the intro and outro music. The song is What's on Your Mind, Kid? You can find them at heartsocietymusic.com. And yeah, we would love to hear from you. Feedback, positive criticism for me, constructive criticism for the other two guys. I think that's important to get.
If you ever want to just talk to Red Tank, which is probably what you want to do, you can also email boardgamebarrage@gmail.com.
Right.
And I'll get that notification, but not these guys. So that'll be our secret way to talk.
I think that's all she wrote for today. We will talk to you guys later.
Cool.
Bye.
They say the truth is the number one stopper. They say you think, but you never want to speak up. They say you're hot and now you're busy, but what's on your mind, kid?
I played it a bunch, but I think Kellen had played like once before, maybe?
Yeah, I played it maybe twice.
Wait a second. We haven't mentioned Biblios all episode.
Oh, no.
What are we even doing with a podcast when we forget to mention Biblios?